Okay, so I've decided to make this video just to go through some of the fundamentals for UV unwrapping. Because if you don't do every step in it like we did the other day in class, then you hit problems, and when you do the UV unwrap, it looks off-centered and skewed, and then you apply the texture and it doesn't really work right. So in the video I explain the step that we miss. So there's a basic cube there. I'm just going to shape it to look like a wall that you could use for something like a space corridor. It's still a cube though, isn't it, effectively? Even if you put some kind of inset faces and then you extrude them in to make like alcoves, it's still a cube. So you can see there, I've done what I did in the demonstration in the class. I've selected the 4 uprights and 3 adjoining faces and marked the seams. Now that's the step that we missed right there. Before you do any unwrap, you must reset the rotation and the scale. In this instance, it doesn't really do very much because it's still a cube, but when you do it as a wall, if you've rotated it and resized it in any way, which you nearly always will, missing that step causes the really strange effects that we had. So you can see the red seams marked. There's the unwrap. I've hidden the seams on the bottom, you'll notice though, for the 3 adjoining faces, because they'll be noticeable much less if I use those at the bottom and not at the top like I normally tend to do. So there's the rotation and scale. New unwrap, no real difference. Like I say, that hasn't really been changed, that cube, so it doesn't have much of an effect on it. Right, so I'm reshaping this a little bit to make it a little bit more suitable for a space corridor. You'll notice I'm restricting the scaling and resizing of it to certain axes just to make it easier. So first of all, the x-axis to make it a wide wall, and then I'm going to pop back in. I'm going to add some edge loops with Control R, just so I've got enough geometry to be able to put an alcove in. You can't add things if there isn't enough geometry, but do be careful how many of these you put in. So first thing, I for inset, and that puts like a square within a square. It's just a little bit of a neater way to do the extrusion. Now I'm extruding it back on the y-axis, and then just have a quick look in X-ray mode so I can see how far back in the wall I've gone, because you don't want it sticking out the back necessarily. Now, I'm not going to go mad and add much more than that, just one inset face and then a simple extrusion. Now, when you've got an alcove like that, in my opinion, the best way to do the unwrap is to select all of the edges around the inset as well as the normal 3 adjoining faces and the vertical uprights, and mark all of them as seams. Then when you do the UV unwrap, it'll be kind of a separate piece. And you'll see in a little while there why that's really useful. Just by, you can add your grid map like we did, and you can see exactly where things are not quite lining up, especially with that recess. And before you add any proper materials, you can use the grid to make sure it's lined up as best as it possibly can. Because any areas that are not lined up for the unwrap will look really obvious when you add a material, depending on how detailed the material is. So I've marked all the seams. I've done an unwrap just on the recess on the alcove, and you saw that there. Now I'm going to go around the actual corridor and select the usual 4 uprights, and that's what I normally select, would be 3 adjoining faces like that. But to make it less noticeable, I'm going to choose the ones on the bottom. You can still see the cross shape there, and there's the UV map with the recess top left corner, slightly different area, separated so we can move them around. So I'm going to just put a new UV map on and set it to UV grid, which is the one that gives us those squares. Notice you can put multiply in there to increase the size. You don't have to work the maths out in your head. Then you can do Control C, Control V, and paste the dimensions, and there's the UV grid. And if I just change this to material doesn't show it, but rendered does, and texture does as well, and then you get a preview of what you've got. So Shift Z is the shortcut for rendered. Now you'll notice everything's gone black, and that's because I've left it in Blender Renderer, which is the default. You can see by the settings there in the materials, that's not what we normally expect to see, diffuse and specular. I'm just going to do a quick save on that 2048 or 2K image map that we created. I'm going to save that to my area so I can add it as a material, see it a little bit more easily. Just rearrange my layout a little bit as well. So you won't see it in the materials, you actually have to add it as an image. So I'm going to go into Cycles Renderer, use nodes, and you don't see the image texture property in there. You have to actually open the nodes panel, which we'll do by splitting this window here. So node editor, and you see got a bit of an extra menu there. I'll just close that menu down and zoom in. So we don't use the diffuse now. Now we're on 2.79. You always need to be using the principal shader, which gives a much higher quality render, especially in the shadows and the highlights. So first of all, I need an image texture, and I can go and choose my UV map, which I will share with you on Google Drive. So there's the UV grid. Remember, colour to colour, so yellow to yellow will work for that image, and then plug in the green to green, and there you can see my UV map. Really great way to line things up. Now in the alcove, it's not quite right, is it? In that left hand corner, things could be better. So phase select mode, so I can see exactly where it is in my UV grid. I need to add that map as well. Clicking that little pin just matches faces up, which is selected on the left, with the UV map on the right. And you can see the recess or the alcoves in a separate area, which is still okay. So I'm going to turn on smooth shading. I have a feeling I'll turn it off though for the final product, because I actually want those facets, those harder edges in there. I'm just going to do a recalculation as well to make sure the faces are all reflecting the light in the right way. It's always worth just double checking that. Notice my lighting is not great at the moment either. I'll have to sort that out. So we're in phase select mode, and then back to Shift Z so I can see what's happening. Now if I select that face and press G to move it, or G for grab, you can see there I can use those grid lines to really line it up properly, black to black, white to white, so it flows really nicely when we put the material on. So we've got a problem with the top one as well, so we're going to do the same thing. Press G for grab, and we can move that to line it up. It's a very small part of the model, so we may have got away with leaving that, but with other textures you wouldn't, so it's important you know how to do it. So that back face in the recess, we're going to move that left and right and up and down until that fits with the grid layout. Nice, much better there, isn't it? Just have a look on the right hand side. It's not too bad, and the bottom is a little bit out as well, but you'll notice moving one will kind of take it out of alignment with another one, so this is just a tiny bit out by the time I finish that, but good enough really for a material. Wouldn't work if it was a grid like this for the finished product, but that'll work great for a material. So I've just rearranged my workspace a little bit so you can see my node editor a little bit better with what's going on. So this time I'm going to actually add a real material. This is from polygon.com. A number of different image maps in there, very complex. So first of all I've added the basic rust. Now in the user preference I just need to make sure I've got the add-on node wrangler enabled, because this allows you to use some shortcuts to add mapping coordinates to scale the texture up and down. So if you press Ctrl and T from the node editor, I'm just going to turn on my screencast keys so you can see what's going on from now on. Should have had them on from the beginning, sorry about that. So I'm duplicating a few of the image textures. I'll need 4 in total, I think, for this particular material. It's got metalness, roughness, the color image and the normal map, so you need an image texture for each one of them. Only the color one is color data, by the way. The other ones you have to change to non-color data. So this one is the metalness, or the metallic effect. It's still a bit big, that material, so it needs the mapping coordinates. So Shift T will add 2 mapping coordinates in there and an extra image one which we don't need because we've already got them. So I'll get rid of the image texture coordinate, plug this in, blue to blue, and then you'll notice there's a scale column on there, and you've got a choice between point and texture. You can try both, see which one you like. So in this instance, the bigger the number, the smaller the actual material shows on the walls. So those massive chunky rusty bits were too big, so increasing the value to 3 has scaled it down. Ambient occlusion, by the way, just adds extra shadowing and shading into your model. You will see it in the final render as well. I think you probably need that every time, to be honest. It should be on by default, but it isn't. So I'm using Shift D to duplicate another couple of image texture nodes. Notice I'm plugging in the output of the mapping coordinate to all of the normal plugs, input plugs. You need to do that every time, to be honest, when you use mapping coordinates like that. So again, change your maps so they're all unique. So that one is the roughness map. You can see it in the file name. So roughness to roughness. This one is the normal map, but you need to put an extra node in between the image texture node and the shader, and it's called normal map, not normal. Non-color data and color to color. You'll notice that's wrong there. I've plugged it into the wrong one. So that should be plugged into the color and then into the normal. And this is what kind of fakes extra texture. It makes it look as if you've added geometry to the wall by putting clever little shadings on there. And it keeps the file size down doing it that way. You shouldn't normally use a displacement map and a normal map, but I'm going to put it on there anyway just to show you what it does. But the rule of thumb is one or the other, a normal map or a displacement map. This one doesn't go into the shader, by the way. It bypasses the shader and goes into the displacement input on the material output on the right there, you can see. I normally just use normal maps, so I'm experimenting a little bit here. It's not that one, just to see which intermediate node you need. So let's try just plugging it straight in. Yeah, it did start to pop a little bit there. There was some extra detail appeared. It's hard to see on this video. So just hooking up all my normals from the output. And at some point I'll notice I've got that normal image texture plugged into the wrong input on the normal map. So in an attempt to just tidy up that back face on the recess, I'm just going to rotate the UV map round. That's had an instant effect, hasn't it? Everything's kind of running more vertically now, so you can't trust Blender totally to do it right when you're using Unwrap, so you've got to go in there and double check it. So I'm just going to sort my lighting out because we're in cycles. We don't want those low powered lamps. We want to use planes and just turn them into emitters. It's a little bit of a faff on because you've got to rotate them so they're pointing in the right direction and work out how big they need to be, how close they need to be. This is the key light, which is the main light. So we change it from diffuse to emission and give it a high power. Something like 24 is really quite powerful when you're in cycles anyway. It would be in the thousands if you were still in Blender renderer. Just find my nodes have disappeared a little bit. And there you can see very simple setup for a lamp. Just emission, material output, and it shows the strength there of 24. So the key light is normally 45 degrees to the left or the right of the camera, which you can see I've got there. And then you need a couple or maybe 3 of these fill lights, and these support the key light just by helping to eliminate some of the shadows and adding a softer light to the areas where the key light's not quite doing it. Now, I'm not great at rotating stuff. To be honest, I nearly always resort to using this tool so I can rotate it and see the angles a little bit better. Pressing R doesn't really cut it for me. So spin it round, that's pointing down. And at this point, give it a new material. Don't reuse the key light. Otherwise, if you change the value, it'll change the value on both of the lights. So I'm calling this one fill, and I'm just going to eliminate the key light now. You have to have a new material before you can delete the old one. So just 6 for that one. Now this time I can reuse it because I want it to have the same power, so I don't need to change the material this time. And the same for any other fill lights that I use. I can reuse this power of 6 for it. So the lighting setup is one of the most important steps that you make. It's pointless doing a brilliant model and then lighting it badly because you just won't do it justice. And you can see the lights are, you can see where the light's casting onto the wall, and you don't really want that. You want it to look a little bit more natural without any casting at all really, but without any glare and without any shadows really, just lit up nice and evenly. So there's no avoiding it. You've got to mess about with these, move them around. You can still see there's a highlight on the top center there a little bit. You can also see my smooth shading is spoiling this wall really. I want this to have much sharper faces on it. I don't want it to look rounded like that. It's your model. If you want it to look rounded, then by all means put smooth shading on, then you can do that. So I'm just going to add some sharpening, I think, to these. So if I select them all the way along, a little bit tricky because I'm at an angle. So I'm using B for box select here, but I've got some of the bottom ones selected. I'll have to undo that. Deselect by holding Shift with B. Deselect those, look from the side, and then we can start to pull angles into it, which, as I said in the class, kind of, it's what you'd expect because this is something that flies, so it's likely to be more round in appearance than it is flat and boxy because it wouldn't be aerodynamic. God, I'm not having much luck with my box selections here. Yeah, so I need to deselect that row all the way along and then pull them into position. Still haven't got them. Missed one at the back there. So box select again, get them all. So if you were machining this, then it would cost a fortune to make it cylindrical and circular compared to just having facets like you've got here, 3 faces with a bit of an angle on it. I think that's how you'd expect these vessels to be, and when you see space stations, that kind of is how it looks. So I've averaged the size of my UVs so that the scaling on them looks a little bit better. Yeah, it definitely looks a little bit odd with that smooth shading on. It's unusual because you want it virtually every time. So I'm going to select all of those edges that I want to sharpen up a little bit. So I'm using Alt and right click to select everything that I want to be sharp, and the bottom as well. And in the edge menu, which is Control E, we've got Mark Sharp, and we could also turn off smooth shading to get it even more. So Mark Sharp did a little bit, but especially with the top edges and the bottom edges, but the smooth shading still overpowering, so we'll take that off. You need to be in object mode, and Shift Z, just have a look at that now. Yeah, that's what I was looking for, that kind of look there. So it's shaping up quite nicely now, especially with the scale of the rust, much better. The recess is pretty good as well. Okay, enjoy doing your UV unwrapping.